We are reading Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. We are on chapter 20 of the book, page number 239 of the book, and page number 48 of the PDF.
It is initially very challenging to understand that attitudes can alter the world one experiences and that there are numerous valid ways of experiencing it. But as in viewing a hologram, what you see depends completely on the position from which you view it. Which position, then, is reality?
So this is a very important part over here, okay? So attitudes can shift the way that you view the world. And this is something that we are seeing over and over again. When I'm doing biofield tuning and I find that the sun star gets stuck at the eye level, it means that the way that you're viewing the world is not proper. You need to change the way that you are viewing the world. Okay, this is what I'm getting. Whenever the sun star gets stuck at the level of the eyes. Okay, now what he's saying is very, very pertinent also. The way that you're viewing it, when you're viewing it, that seems real to you. But if we change our position and then we view it from another position, the view will be totally different. So what is reality? So at the end of the day, reality is the way that you perceive it. So the way that you are perceiving something, that becomes your reality.
In fact, this is a holographic universe. Each point of view reflects a position defined by the viewer's unique level of consciousness. If you are on this side of the hologram, your perception will hardly agree with that of the observer on the other side.
So again over here, right, he says very clearly that your level of consciousness will determine the way that you're viewing something, right? So this is again of that elephant story where there were 5 blind men who went to understand what the elephant looked like. Now the guy who pulled the tail thought that it was like a rope, or the guy who touched the leg said it's a column. Okay, the guy who touched the ear felt it's like a fan. The guy who measured the trunk, he felt that it's a hose or whatever, right? The person who felt the tooth thought it was like a dagger. So everyone was defining the elephant in the way that they were perceiving it. So in the same case over here, again, we are viewing the reality from our perception, right? And our perception may not match the perception of another person viewing it from another state of consciousness.
Be crazy. He must be crazy is a common reaction to such wide discrepancy, and the world is a set of holograms in limitless dimensions, not, as is often said, of mirrors which fixed in time and place and offer only a single reflection, are fixed. Auditory experience also is part of a holographic series of attractor fields of all the sounds that ever were. The physical world is tactile too. It has texture, color, dimension, and spatial relationships, such as position and shape. Each of these is again part of an underlying sequence, which, with all other qualities, goes back in end of time to the original source of its existence, which is now.
So again, all our sensory perceptions will give us different views, right? And everything is building on everything else. But when we go into expanded states, we transcend time. So everything is happening in the now. But perceptions for that point in time, when we are working in linear time, may differ when you're looking at it from the auditory perception, from the taste, from the smell, from the touch. It will become totally different.
A hologram, we might say, is in and of itself a process. There is nothing fixed in a three-dimensional hologram. And what then of a four-dimensional hologram? It would include all possible instances of itself simultaneously.
So, one second. So, what does this imply, right? We are living in a three-dimensional world over here. When you go into fourth dimension, you add time. So when everything is there in every point in time, so everything is existing simultaneously. Okay, this is very important to understand that in the three-dimensional way that we are viewing things, it is happening sequentially. But when we add time, then A, B, C happens at the same time. So everything is there immediately.
To change seems to be to move through time, but if time itself is transcended, then there is no such thing as sequence. If all is now, there is nothing to follow from here to there. Each hologram is in itself an evolutionary projection from an endless non-linear matrix of events which are not causally related, but instead synchronous.
So what does this mean, right? We are not going from A will lead to B to lead to C. Everything is happening at the same time. They're not in sequence. They're happening at the same time. It's a non-linear matrix of events.
Then, at the perceptual level of 600 to 700, what was, what is, and what will be are comprehended wordlessly within the complete simultaneous holographic possibility. The term ineffable here begins to take meaning.
So over here in the book, in the book, it is talking about indescribable, right? So again, people who've attended the Gateway Voyage will actually acknowledge this, that when you go into focus 15, you will find that everything is existing at the same time. And they cannot describe their experience in the words, in normal words, because it happens in a different level of consciousness, which is not equitable with the state of consciousness that we normally exist in, right? So what he's talking about, the level of consciousness of 600 and 700, literally when you're attending the Gateway Voyage and you're going into focus 15 and focus 21, you actually go and experience those states of consciousness for yourself.
Let us attempt to understand all this better through an example. Imagine a bum on a street corner. Please scroll. In a fashionable neighborhood in a big city stands an old man in tattered clothes, alone, leaning against the corner of an elegant brownstone. Look at him from the perspective of various levels of consciousness and note the differences in how he appears.
So, so this is a very, it's a nice example, right? Like a vagabond, like a beggar who's standing against a house. Now, what would he appear to in the various levels of consciousness that we are talking about? All of us know the consciousness scale, right? It starts with shame at 20 and then moves up the ladder. So this will be an interesting view of looking at how a person will view something from the level of consciousness that they are viewing it.
From the bottom of the scale at a level of 20, the level of shame, the bum is dirty, disgusting, disgraceful. From level 30, guilt, he would be blamed for his condition. He deserves what he gets. He's probably a lazy welfare cheat. At 50, hopelessness, his plight would appear desperate, damning evidence that society can't do anything about homelessness. At, at 75, grief, the old man looks tragic, friendless and forlorn. At a consciousness level of 100, fear, we might see him as threatening, a social menace. Perhaps we should call the police before he commits some crime. At 125, desire, he might represent a frustrating problem. Why doesn't somebody do something? Sorry. At 125, desire, he might represent a frustrating problem. Why doesn't somebody do something? At 150, anger, the old man might look like he could be violent, or on the other hand, one could be furious that such conditions exist. At 175, pride, he could be seen as an embarrassment or as lacking the self-respect to better himself. At 200, courage, we might be motivated to wonder if there is a local homeless shelter. All he needs is a job and a place to live. At 250, neutrality, the bum looks okay, maybe even interesting. Live and let live. We might say, after all, he's not hurting anyone. At 310, willingness, we might decide to go down and see what we can do to cheer up that fellow on the corner or volunteer some time at the local mission. At 350, acceptance, the man on the corner appears intriguing. He probably has an interesting story to tell. He is where he is for reasons we may never understand. At 400, reason, he is a symptom of the current economic and social malaise, or perhaps a good subject for in-depth psychological study. At the higher levels, the old man begins to look not only interesting but friendly, then lovable. Perhaps we would then be able to see what he was. In fact, one who had transcended social limits and gone free. A joyful old guy with the wisdom of age in his face and the serenity that comes from indifference to material things. At 500, peace. He is revealed as one's own self in a temporary expression.
So again, viewed from various levels of consciousness, the same scenario will look very, very different. So always we are asking this question, right? What is the level of consciousness that we are operating from? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves, because our perception actually depends on the level of consciousness that we are operating from.
When approached, the bum's response to these different levels of consciousness would vary with them. With some, he would feel secure, with others, frightened or dejected. Some would make him angry, others delighted. Some he would therefore avoid, others greet with pleasure. This is it said that, thus it is said that we meet what we mirror.
So now this becomes very important, right? What are we radiating? Because that will affect the other person in front of us, right? So it becomes very important to see what is the state of consciousness we are operating on, because the response that we will receive from the person in front of us will mirror the state of consciousness that we are operating on. Now, it also depends on who's the bigger magnet, who is the bigger, has the bigger charge or the bigger force field, and who will influence and affect the other person, right? So this becomes important to understand that our level of consciousness will create our reality, because that is how we are going to be viewing whatever is happening around us. So we have to really understand that we are creating our reality. Reality is what it is, but how we perceive it is what makes it real for us.
Comment. It has been my observation that most will see others from what their culture has programmed into their memory, rather, it be parents, relatives, etc. It is not until they either experience the same condition or find it not true or true in other people, especially when visiting foreign countries or different living areas within our own country. Another aspect of this is using hypnotherapy to regress the person to find these programs and then have them release them through abreaction once they are found. The person then takes on a new outlook of life and their relationship to others. This is also readily seen when one experiences a past life only to find they were the person now being condemned in the present, and the knowledge allows them to make changes to the next level. You might say that was the lesson they needed to resolve in this life. The session served as a shortcut to find out the problem as to why the person was stuck in this level of their growth and resolve it. Tracy.
So what is she saying over here? She is very clearly stating that, again, we are observing life through the level of consciousness that we operate in. Now, we are many times we go into a reaction, right? There are certain triggers that trigger us off. Now, what she's saying here is that it may be that trigger was formed in a certain other association which we had in the past, which creates the trigger here. So in biofield tuning, we constantly use this example when we are doing the timeline, that today, if you had a problem with a very dear friend when you were at the age of 4, and you got really upset and it created a really traumatic situation for you, it is a part of your biofield. It will be hanging over there, right? Now, any friendship which comes into your field will have to pass through that traumatic, discorded vibratory field which is stuck in your biofield, right? And it is going to affect all your relationships with friends. So what she's saying here, that you can go into a past life and rectify it. We can also rectify it by bringing attention to it in the current lifetime through the process of biofield tuning. So you release that, and when you release that, it allows you to function normally. It doesn't color your reactions to various stimulus that you are having in your life.
So much for the manner in which our level of consciousness decides what we see, the world we encounter as passive observers. It is equally true that having placed that construct upon the reality before us, we will react to it in a fashion predicated by the level from which we perceive. External events may define conditions, but they do not determine the consciousness level of human response. We can take the more literal scene of our current penal system as an illustration.
So again, a situation may arise, but how we will respond, it depends on our level of consciousness, the way that we are perceiving it. Because you put 100 people in the same situation and they will not have the same reaction, okay? Or they will not have the same response. They will all respond differently depending on their mental breakup and the level of consciousness that they are operating from.
Placed in an identical and extremely stressful environment, different inmates react in ways that vary extraordinarily according to where they are coming from. Prisoners whose consciousness is at the lowest end of the scale sometimes attempt suicide in jail. Others become psychotic and delusional with guilt. Some in the same circumstance fall into despondency, go mute and stop eating. Still others sit with head in hands, trying to hide incipient tears of grief. A very frequent expression is fear, manifested either through paranoid defensiveness or blatant psychophancy. In the same cell block, we see other prisoners with a greater degree of energy, rage, violent, and assaultive. Pride is everywhere in the form of macho bragging and dominance.
So what is being said here? That in any society, in any culture, right now, he's giving the example of a prison. There are various people in that prison, right, operating at different levels of consciousness. So where you're operating from will decide what you're projecting or the way that you're behaving.
By contrast, some inmates find the courage to face the truth of why they are there and begin to look at their lives honestly. And there are always those who just roll with the punches and try to get some reading done. At the level of acceptance, we see prisoners who seek out help and join support groups. It is not unusual for an occasional inmate to take a new interest in learning, studying in the prison library, or becoming a jailhouse lawyer. Some of history's most influential books were written behind bars. A few prisoners go through a transformation of consciousness and become loving and generous caregivers to their fellows. And it is not unheard of for a prisoner aligned with higher energy fields to grow deeply spiritual or even actively pursue enlightenment.
Okay, and it says over here, some even become saintly. So again, what is the attractor field that you start associating with? That will determine your level of consciousness. So it becomes very aware. We need to all become very aware of what are we connecting with, what are we attracted to, what are the fields that we are getting, working with, because that will determine our level of consciousness. Bianca, you want to say something?
But yeah, I just wanted to ask, when you were talking about the level of consciousness, is that affected by whatever mood we are in at that particular time? Like when you spoke about the magnetic field of another person overtaking your own magnetic field and the way we are reacting to it. So the emotion that we feel at that particular time, does that affect and result in whatever happens?
Absolutely. So in one aspect of your life, you may be operating at 600, right? In another aspect of life, you may be operating at 50. So the idea is to start becoming aware as to where you're operating from. And in my view, the first step is the grid, to understand whether you're operating from the left or the right, because that determines the benchmark. As soon as you go onto the right side, you will go above 200. As soon as you're on the left side, you're below 200. Right? So that becomes your first measure. Like over here, he's very clearly saying, right, that someone in the prison may be operating from guilt. Another person may be operating from apathy. Someone is willing to learn, right? So again, when you're willing to learn, when you're willing to grow, when you're willing to ask for help, when you're willing to change, you're operating above 200. Right? Now, if you're a macho man, you want to control the prison, you're operating at 175, which is the level of pride. And then he says over here very clearly that some people become a saint in the prison. And it's a fact that many of the world's best books have been written by people who have been in prison. Why? Because they are free. They don't have anything to do. They're clear and they use that time to create something. So now they are operating at a higher level of consciousness. So your level of consciousness will be determined by your inner weather pattern and the external weather pattern. Now, if your inner weather pattern is more resilient than your external weather pattern, then you will have an effect on the external weather pattern. But if the external weather pattern is more powerful than your internal weather pattern, then it will start influencing your weather pattern.
So it all depends on our own inner resilience.
Absolutely. That is the name of the game, right? That's the game that we are playing. Today, why am I telling people attend the workshop, attend the workshop? It's not for me that I'm asking you to attend the workshop. It's for you that I'm asking you to attend the workshop. Because it gives you tools to be able to manage your inner weather pattern so that you can raise your level of resilience. That's the basic idea. To empower yourself, right? To be able to be in that state of equanimity in spite of what is happening around you. And then, see, it's like, suppose you're visiting the emergency room. I keep using this example, okay? And there's one doctor who's very, very haphazard, do this, and he's getting very hassled. And there's another doctor who comes in, he coolly assesses the situation, gives proper instruction to the proper people, and goes and does what he needs to do. Now, who are you going to associate with, or who would you like to associate with?
The one who can give proper instructions, right?
So now where are you?
Where am I in the state of consciousness?
No. I'm saying, where are you? Are you the hassled guy, the first guy, or the second guy?
The second guy.
You're the second guy. Okay, then you made it. No problem. Okay. Anything else?
Just wanted to say that how do we make sure that our magnetic field is always the bigger one? Is other than the tools that we can use.
Exactly. So you do the workshop, you'll get many tools to use in various situations.
Okay.
Now, if you are saying that, you're never hassled and you're always in equanimity, then you've made it. Then you don't need any of the tools. It's all built in. But if you're getting hassled and situations are bothering you, then you need certain tools to be able to enhance your resilience, enhance your capacity to bear the brunt, enhance your, again, you'll fall, okay? How fast you recover will depend on your inner resilience. So again, all these tools help you to do that. I don't know why you're resisting doing the workshop. Seriously, I'm telling you. You have all these questions. What do you mean eventually? Why not next time?
Okay, next time. When I come to Calcutta, I'll do it.
All bullshit. It's all online. Okay, we've had many people doing it from America also. So
okay. Next time. I'll do it next time.
The next workshop you're doing?
Okay.
Good.
I'll do the next
I'm adding your name.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
How we react depends upon the world we are reacting to. Who we become, as well as what we see, are both determined by perception, which can be said simply to create the world. It is interesting to note that the further down the scale of consciousness a person is, the harder it is for him to maintain eye contact. At the low end, visual contact is avoided altogether.
Now, this is very important. Okay. So it says over here, who we become as well as what we see is determined by perception. So it's always determined by our awareness. What are we aware about? What are we perceiving? Right. Now, eye contact, okay, is a very, very clear determinant of what state of consciousness you're operating from. You'll find that highly spiritual people hardly blink. You'll find that they don't blink too much and they can hold your gaze for a very long time, right? Because they are still inside, so they can maintain that stillness. If you are very restless inside, then your eye will keep moving and you will not be able to maintain eye contact. So that's why they say the eyes are the mirrors to the soul. You can actually go into the soul of a person by just watching the eyes of a person.
In contrast, as we go up the scale, the ability to hold prolonged and finally almost endless gaze at great depth becomes characteristic. We are all familiar with the guarded glance of guilt, the glare of hostility, and the unblinking open-eyedness of innocence. Power and perception go hand in hand.
So again, when you operate out of power, perception also gets enhanced. And when you perceive well, power also gets enhanced.
How then does perception work? What are its mechanics? That perception is subjectively unique is evidenced by common observation. We are all familiar with the example of a mock trial in law school, wherein different witnesses relate wildly divergent accounts of the same event. The mechanism of perception is like a movie theater in which the projector is consciousness itself.
So now this is important, okay? Everyone is perceiving the same thing with the lens that they at the consciousness level that they are operating at. So if one event takes place and you ask 10 people to describe the event, you will get 10 different observations, simply because you will be observing what you are interested in, right? You are not going to be observing from the other guy's lens. You're going to be observing from your lens. So you may be paying attention more to the cat than to the dog, right? Because you're more interested in the cat. So when you give an account of the situation, you talk more of the cat. The other guy may be interested in the dog. The guy will give a description of what happened to the dog. So everyone is viewing the world and even the same incident with the lens of their perception.
The forms on the film emulsion are the attractor energy patterns, and the moving pictures on the screen are the world that we perceive and call reality. We could say that the configurations on the film are the ABC attractor fields in mind, and the movie picture on the screen is the A to B to C observed as the phenomenal world.
So this is very beautifully put, right? When you have a reel of film, everything exists in that film. But when it is projected one at a time, what do you call it? One of the slides at a time. Okay. So in the film, everything is there. It encompasses everything. But the way that we are observing it is one at a time. So we are existing in time. But the film is in no time because everything exists inside the film. So again, with ABC, the film represents ABC, and the film, when we are seeing it, represents A will lead to B, will lead to C.
This scheme provides a model for a better understanding of the nature of causality, which occurs on the level of the film, not the level of the screen. Because the world routinely applies its efforts to the screen of life at the level of A to B to C, these endeavors are ineffectual and costly. Causality stems from the attractor patterns of levels of energy, the ABCs of the configurations imprinted on the film of mind, illuminated by consciousness.
So what does this imply? That everything is actually already imprinted in our level of consciousness. Everything already exists. Only that our level of the way that we are perceiving it in this state of 3D environment that we are living in, that we are perceiving it in that way. So all options are already existing. Everything has already happened. It's only that now we are experiencing it.
The nature of the stream of consciousness, its pattern of thought, perception, feeling, and memory is the consequence of entrainment of the attractor energy field by which it is dominated. It is well to remember that this domination is volitional. It is not imposed, but is the outcome of one's own choices, beliefs, and goals.
So which attractor field you will be attracted to depends on your level of consciousness, your feelings, your belief systems. And the idea over here is to transcend our belief system. The more higher you can go, the more you can let go of your belief systems and all the stuff that is holding you back, the higher level of consciousness you will start operating from, right? And this is voluntary. You can actually change it in a jiffy, right? I change my belief system. I change the way that I'm perceiving the world.
By consensus, we synchronize with a field pattern which implies specific styles of processing and influences all our decisions according to its accompanying set of values and meanings. What appears an important and exciting piece of information from the perspective of one level might be boring or even repulsive at another level. Truth is subjective. That can be frightening. The current elevation of science to the status of infallible oracle is an expression of our insecure compulsion to feel there is some kind of a measurable, universally predictable, objective world out there upon which we can rely.
So, so this becomes very, very important, right? The pattern that we are synchronizing with can appear very different from different levels of consciousness. This is again and again being repeated over here, right? Now, what becomes real to you is something that is real to you. It may not be real to someone else, right? Now, for example, personally speaking, I have stopped watching the news, right? I am not interested in connecting with anything that is depleting. Now, if let us say there is a fire in one place in the city of Calcutta, I can get affected by that fire, or I can decide not to get affected by the fire, right? Now, it all depends on which attractor field I am connecting with. Now, there's a beggar on the street. One person will say that, "Arey Baba, Baba, what's happened to him?" Right? And the other person will ignore him. That no, that person needs to be doing something for himself, for example. So the way that you are interacting with something, again, ultimately comes back to the point of the level of consciousness that you are operating at. So reality is not fixed because it depends on your perception. And this can be a very problematic thing when you look at it from the scientific principle, because to be scientific, you can do that experiment again and again and you will get the same result. But over here, everything, reality depends on your perception. So something may be very tough for someone to do, and that same thing may be very easy for someone else to do. So how do you rate it? Is it tough or is it easy? Right? That becomes a problem as far as science is concerned.
But in transcending the emotional distortions of perception, science itself creates yet another conceptual distortion. Due to the limitation of its parameters, science must, of necessity, remove data from context in order to study it. But in the end, it is only the context which gives the data its whole significance or value. The eventual discovery arrived at by advanced theoretical physics can be reached from any organized field of human knowledge. The more detailed one's analysis of the structure of out there, the more one discovers that what one is examining is, in fact, the nature of the intricate processes of consciousness in here. There is
Okay.
nothing out.
So one second. So what they are very clearly saying is that science is very, very empirical, but everything that is happening around us has an emotional content also, and it becomes very difficult for science to remove the emotionality of anything that is happening. Now, when they're talking about theoretical physicists there, what does a theoretical physicist do? He goes into an altered state and does an experiment in the head and then writes down the theory in this level of consciousness. But many times that experiment, which he has put down in a theory, cannot be done in the real world because the equipment doesn't exist to be able to handle it. Right. So now what happens? As you start going into higher levels of consciousness, you start to understand that what is out there is being reflected over here, right? And the idea is to bring that level of consciousness and reality, the way that we are perceiving it, back here. And that's exactly what we are doing in all the programs, going into that expanded state and bringing that ability to perceive back into our day-to-day lives or into this 3D reality over here.
There is nothing out there other than consciousness itself. The habitual tendency to believe otherwise is a fundamental illusion, a vanity of the human mind which tends always to view its transitory subject as mine. Objectively, it can be seen that thoughts really belong to the consciousness of the world. The individual mind merely processes them in new combinations and permutations.
So what does this mean, right? The ego is operating. Whatever we are perceiving, we think that it is real and my perception is the reality, the ultimate reality. But ultimately, that is not the case. That expanded perception always is bigger than our egoistic perception.
What seems to be truly original thoughts appear only through the medium of genius and are invariably felt by their authors to be found or given, not created. It may be the case that we are each unique, as no two snowflakes are alike. However, we are still lust snowflakes.
Okay, so what does this imply? That when people are going into altered states and downloading stuff, right? So if you meet the best poets in the world, the best authors in the world, the best artists in the world, the best sculptors in the world, they will always say, I saw it before I did it, right? It came down to me, it got downloaded, I heard it in my head, right? I did not create it. So what are they doing? They're going into that expanded state, connecting with a higher state of consciousness and downloading the data and bringing it over here and presenting it to us. So the ego gets transcended when we start going into higher states. We say that it was a gift, we were given it. It is not being created by us. But if your ego is strictly driven, then I comes in. I did it. I did it. When you are operating at higher states of consciousness, you're not going to say, I did it. You said it will download it. I got it. I'm just presenting it to humanity.
It may be the case that we are each unique, as no two snowflakes are alike. However, we are still just snowflakes. We all inherit the human condition of mind in our unasked for birth. To transcend the limitations of mind, it is necessary to dethrone it from its tyranny as sole arbiter of reality. The vain mind confers its imprimatur of authenticity on the movie of life it happens to view. Its very nature is to convince us that its unique view of experience is the genuine article. Each individual secretly feels that his experience of the world alone is accurate.
So this is operating totally from the ego mind, right? That whatever I am perceiving, whatever I am doing is correct. There is no other reality. But that is not a fact. And when we are looking at spiritually operating people, they are never going to be stuck to their point of view. They're always open to accepting stuff, right? They're always open to experiencing stuff because they realize that this is not the end. There is always more to experience, more to say, more to do, and so on and so forth. Bianca, you want to say something?
So, Bhaiya, you're saying that when we give up doership, when we let go, when we become, when we just don't have any ego at all, then we experience that the reality that we've been wanting to experience, everything that we've been perceiving for so long, it becomes very clear. It's like that dirty lens that when we give up being egoistic, it becomes clean, and then we can see the world a lot more
Correct,
clearly.
absolutely. But see, you need a little bit of ego to operate in this world. If you get totally devoid of ego, you will not be able to work in this world because there will be no distinction between you and the table,
True.
you and the spoon, right? So we do need a little bit of ego to be able to be present in this world. But the less ego that you have, the more open you become. So you can see reality as it is. But again, there are various levels of consciousness also, right? So again, what is the state of consciousness that you're operating from? You may drop your ego, but at what state of consciousness you're dropping it? Because if I'm operating at 600, my worldview will be X. If I operate at 700, my worldview will be Y. You get what I'm saying? So the higher the level of consciousness you go into, the more closer to oneness you get, the more real your reality tends to become. That's what I would observe, right? That's what I would say. That today, when people are going into these higher states of focus 10, 12, the way that they observe the world will shift. It changes. Okay, I'm sure all of the people will say that the way that they are handling life, the way that they're observing stuff shifts when you go into these higher states of consciousness.
So that connection with the divinity around that you have, it changes according to your level of consciousness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So today, when you see someone is in Bhakti Bhav, they are worshipping the statue, right? Now, you will find that as you grow in spirituality, the idea that you have to worship the statue will drop. Are you getting what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now, when you're worshipping the statue, there is an ego involved, my statue, my God, right? So in spirituality also, you have that my coming in. My God is better than your God. So where are you operating from?
Yeah.
What
From
level?
the left
Pride.
side.
Pride. So you're operating at 175. If you, as you go higher, then my and your stops, it drops. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your.
In our discussion of the levels of consciousness, we noted that one of the downsides of pride is denial. Every mind engages in denial in order to protect its correctness. This begets the fixity that and resistance to change, which prevents the average consciousness from advancing much more than 5 points in a lifetime.
So now this becomes important over here that most of the people are operating below 200 and many are operating at pride, right? When you're operating at pride, you become rigid with your belief system. You want to prove yourself right? And you're not willing to accept any other thing. So what it says over here, it operates in denial to protect its correctness, right? And because you are stuck with that point of view, naturally then you're not progressing because you're not allowing yourself to experience anything differently because you totally get stuck. And that is why only 5 points of growth at levels of consciousness are normally possible by any entity, by any person.
Great leaps in level of consciousness are always preceded by surrender of the illusion that I know. Frequently, the only way one can reach this willingness to change is when one hits bottom by running out of a course of action to its end in the defeat of a futile belief system.
So again, when you hit a wall, right, now your belief system cannot determine or is found to be incorrect in a particular situation. So then you surrender. When you surrender, that's when the leap of faith starts taking place. That's when the expansion of consciousness starts taking place. That's why you'll find when people are totally hitting rock bottom, suddenly they will come up again. Why? Because they surrender. Levels of consciousness start to shift. They drop the pride. Rashmiji, you want to say something? We can't hear you.
Light cannot enter a closed box. The upside of catastrophe can be an opening to a higher level of awareness. If life is viewed as a teacher, it then becomes just that. Unless the painful lessons of life which we deal ourselves are thus transformed through humility into gateways to growth and development, they are wasted.
So again, when we hit the rock bottom and we start operating from humility, right, and gratitude, appreciation, that is when the transformation starts to take place. And what we are seeing over and over again, that if you're on the left side of the grid, two of the best ways in which you can shift to the right is gratitude and appreciation. The moment you start appreciating and be grateful for what you have, automatically you will shift into the right side of the grid.
We witness, we observe, we record apparent processions of experiences. But even in awareness itself, nothing actually happens. Awareness merely registers what is being experienced. It has no effect on it. Awareness is the all-encompassing attractor field of unlimited power, identical with life itself. And there is nothing the mind believes that is not fallacious at a higher level of awareness.
So again, in the Vedanta talks, Nagarji keeps talking about the Aadhar. Okay, that the Lord is the Aadhar. It's the screen on which everything is being played, right? So the movie is being played on the screen. If the screen wasn't there, then we could not see the movie. Okay, but the screen is not affected by what is being played on the screen. So again, as we progress in the levels of consciousness, we find that the observation that we were making at a lower level of consciousness is not valid as soon as we go into a higher state of consciousness. And ultimately, everything is erroneous. Everything is false because there is only one truth and there is no truth, right? So it's a contradictory kind of a statement there.
The mind identifies with its content. It takes credit and blame for what it receives. For it would be humbling to the mind's vanity to admit that the only thing it is doing is experiencing, and in fact, only experiencing.
So we keep saying experience the experience for the experience, right? The more you experience, the more you can grow, right? But ultimately, you are only experiencing. What is, it is not getting affected by your experiencing. But you as a state of consciousness, as a conscious entity, can grow because of that experiencing.
The mind does not even experience the world, but only sensory reports of it. Even brilliant thoughts and deepest feelings are only experience. Ultimately, we have but one function: to experience experience.
So again, keep experiencing. That's the only thing that we have come here for. The more we experience, the more we grow. And the idea is to keep growing.
The major limitation of consciousness is its innocence. Consciousness is gullible. It believes everything it hears. Consciousness is like hardware that will play back any software put into it. We never lose the innocence of our consciousness, of our own consciousness. It persists naive and trusting like an impressionable child. Its only guardian is a discerning awareness that scrutinizes the incoming program.
So the overall consciousness, right, is connected with innocence and will accept everything. So if you see a highly spiritual person, automatically the person becomes very innocent. And if you tell the person something, the person will accept it, right? So we have to operate our awareness, and that's again determined by the level of consciousness that we are operating at, as to what is real and what is not real, right? So awareness again becomes the key. How aware you are of what is happening. Yeah,
Cover the
Bianca.
eight.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Bianca.
just wanted to ask something regarding something we did earlier about hypnotherapy. That when you go into that state, when you are getting hypnotized, then you lose what is real and what is unreal, right? Sometimes people lose time and they get into states where they don't even remember what they said or what happened. So can you explain that?
Yeah, so when you are doing hypnotherapy, the hypnotherapist is leading you to a certain space, right? So you're being led there. You're not empowered to go where you need to go. You understand? So when you're taken into that state, naturally you're going into an altered state of consciousness. So you may be stepping out of time and space and not really understanding what you're doing and saying. Now, that's the distinction between when you're going into these states of consciousness in the programs, you are empowered to go where you want to go and then experience the experience in that state of consciousness, so that you can understand that what you are experiencing here may not be the ultimate reality, because when you go into an altered state of consciousness, the reality is something totally different. So it breaks your myth that, whatever you're experiencing here is the ultimate truth. And then automatically, this is exactly what is being said here, right? That you shift into a higher state. So whatever is observed in a lower state of consciousness, you understand that it is not real. So when you are doing it with the processes that we are talking in the workshop, right, you don't have a hypnotherapist. You empower yourself to go into those altered states. And you are aware of what you're doing in those altered states. Are you getting the distinction?
So
Here,
you can say that Maya, the role of Maya becomes very clear.
yeah, so again, Maya doesn't become clear totally, right? Because even if you're going into these altered states, there are even higher altered states. So as you grow in your level of perception, your observation about Maya keeps getting different. Na? So your understanding of reality will keep changing as you go into higher states of consciousness. So what is real and what is not real, you start discerning in a different way altogether. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah. Understood. Thank you, Bhai.
Cover the ages, it has been noted that merely observing the mind tends to increase one's level of consciousness. A mind which is being watched becomes more humble and begins to relinquish its claim to omniscience. A growth in awareness can then take place. With humility comes the capacity to laugh at oneself and increasingly be less the victim of the mind and more its master.
So again, as we go into higher states of consciousness, we start getting into witness consciousness. We start having a witness attitude, that we are doing, but we are also observing what we are doing. And when that starts to happen, then you are observing yourself. And since you are observing yourself, you know that what you're doing is right or wrong at a higher state of consciousness. So the witness attitude starts to play in raising your level of consciousness. So the witness attitude is very important. Dropping the doer attitude and getting into the witness attitude that you're doing, but you're observing yourself doing, so you're not doing, right? So it becomes, you're transcending the doer. Let's put it in that way.
From thinking that we are our minds, we begin to see that we have minds and that it is the mind that has thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and opinions. Eventually, we may arrive at the insight that all our thoughts are merely borrowed from the great database of consciousness and were never really our own.
So again, when you go into these higher states, you can actually observe that what you are thinking is actually coming from somewhere else. So what does this imply, right? In the energy field program, we tell people, I'm drawing a line. Does this have energy or not? Then we ask them the question, how did this line come into existence? I had to think of it, right? But where did the thought come from? It never just popped over here. It came from somewhere. So it came from the big guy, right? And that is what she's talking about here, that eventually we may arrive at the insight that all of our thoughts are merely borrowed from the great database of consciousness and were never really our own, right? And this is a fact that whatever you're thinking, where did it come from? It came from a higher state of consciousness.
Prevailing thought systems are received, absorbed, identified with, and in due time replaced by new ideas that have become fashionable with us. As we place less value on such passing notions, they lose their capacity to dominate us, and we experience progressive freedom of, as well as from, the mind. This in turn ripens into a new source of pleasure. Fittingly, the pleasure of existence itself matures as one ascends the scale of consciousness.
So what is this implying? Belief systems are constantly being transcended. So at one time, humanity, as we know it, human beings believe that the world is flat. But ultimately, someone came up with the idea that the world is round. Now, this is the existing belief system that the world is round. Now, tomorrow we may have some other theory which actually proves that the world is not round, it is some other shape. We don't know, right? So as we go into higher states of consciousness, we start accepting that things may be very different from what they appear, right? And as we go into these higher states, we start really observing what everything is actually is, right? So again, it shifts the way that we observe and look at things. So as we go into higher states, reality starts to change for us. I think we can stop here.